In Dallas's glittering Potter's House megachurch, a crowd of thousands came seeking inspiration, their faith amplified by cameras and LED screens. But a night meant for charity and worship spiraled into chaos when a fiery debate between pulpit and pride turned sacred ground into a stage for confrontation. Chuck Norris wasn't your average celebrity guest. For 6 decades, he'd been a martial arts icon and former Air Force veteran, known worldwide for ending fights before they began and winning them without throwing a punch. When Bishop T.D. Jakes lost control and hurled his Bible in anger, the world watched as its leather cover skidded to rest at Chuck Norris's feet. In that moment, he rose not to strike back, but to redefine retaliation. His calm response would silence millions and expose the difference between strength and power. What began as a faith-fueled spectacle would become a global reckoning on ego, restraint, and redemption. The city of Dallas, and every screen tuned in, would never forget the night when Chuck Norris fought pride itself and won without violence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Potter's House megachurch in Dallas gleamed like a polished jewel under the assault of stage lights. Thousands of bodies filled the sprawling auditorium, a living sea of humanity that breathed and moved as one. The space pulsed with anticipation, not just the regular Sunday crowd, but celebrities, influencers, cameras, and crew members who transformed the sanctuary into something between a television studio and a spiritual arena. Marcus Lee paced backstage, one hand pressed to his earpiece, the other frantically swiping through messages on his phone. As the event producer, he'd orchestrated dozens of these charity broadcasts, but tonight felt different. The Faith Meets Strength Gala had drawn unprecedented attention, trending on 3 platforms before it even began. Camera 3. Pan right. Get that reaction shot from the front row, Marcus directed through his headset. And someone tell Sister Naomi her mic check is in 5 minutes. The monitor before him showed Bishop T.D. Jakes adjusting his tie in his private green room. The man's presence filled the small space, even on the screen. A magnetic energy that had built a ministry reaching millions. Tonight wasn't just another sermon, it was a spectacle designed to bridge worlds. The faithful and the famous, tradition and trending, gospel and the global audience. Marcus scrolled through the guest list one last time. The MMA fighters and fitness influencers were already posting from the VIP section. Gospel artists were mingling with celebrities backstage. But one name made Marcus pause every time he saw it. Chuck Norris. He's actually here? Marcus had asked when security confirmed the martial arts legend's arrival an hour earlier. Arrived alone. Declined the green room. Asked to be seated with minimal fuss, the security chief had replied. Now Marcus glanced at another monitor showing the auditorium's front row. There sat Chuck Norris, dressed in a simple dark suit, hands resting calmly on his knees. Unlike the influencers around him who constantly checked phones or posed for selfies, Chuck simply observed, radiating a stillness that seemed almost out of place amid the electric atmosphere. From this command center, Marcus watched as Sister Naomi Brooks made her way to the choir stand. At 28, she carried herself with the dignified grace of someone twice her age. Her voice a gift that had brought congregations to tears across the country. Tonight would be her biggest platform, yet a solo that would reach millions of viewers. She straightened her cream-colored robe and took her position, hands clasped tightly, eyes closed in silent prayer. 2 minutes, people, Marcus announced into his headset. Bishop Jakes is ready. Congregation is seated. Sister Naomi is in position. He hesitated, then added, and someone confirmed that Eli Carter knows his cue. I don't want any surprises. But surprises were Eli, the Beast Carter's specialty. The 26-year-old MMA fighter and fitness influencer had built a following of millions by being unpredictable, outrageous, and deliberately provocative. His inclusion in tonight's program had been controversial, a decision Marcus had fought for, arguing that Eli's audience represented exactly the young, skeptical viewers they needed to reach. What Marcus didn't mention in those planning meetings was how Eli had risen to fame partly by mocking traditional institutions, including churches and pastors. The lights dimmed across the auditorium. A hush fell over the congregation. On the main screen, a countdown began: 10, 9, 8, accompanied by a heartbeat sound that grew louder with each number. "We're live in 3, 2, Marcus pointed silently as the red broadcast light illuminated. Music swelled from somewhere, unseen, a perfect blend of gospel tradition and contemporary production. The stage lights swept across the congregation, capturing faces raised in anticipation. The camera found Chuck Norris, his expression unreadable but attentive, before panning back to the empty pulpit. Then Bishop T.D. Jakes strode onto the stage. The response was immediate. A standing ovation. Hands raised. Voices calling out in welcome. Jakes moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding such spaces, his tailored suit gleaming under the lights, his smile warm yet powerful. He raised his hands, Bible clutched in one, and the congregation fell silent with remarkable speed. "Dallas." His voice rolled through the space like thunder. "And to those joining us around the world tonight, welcome to Faith Meets Strength." The audience erupted again. Camera operators moved smoothly between positions, capturing every angle of the electric moment. "Tonight," Jakes continued, "we bring together two worlds that some say cannot coexist: faith and physical power, spiritual strength and bodily discipline." He moved across the stage with measured steps. "But I'm here to tell you that the strongest muscle in your body isn't your arm." He flexed demonstratively, drawing chuckles from the crowd. "It isn't your leg. It's this." He tapped his temple. "And beyond that, it's this." He placed his hand over his heart. From his position in the front row, Chuck Norris watched with quiet intensity. Unlike those around him who nodded enthusiastically or called out affirmations, he remained still, not unappreciative, but contained, like a man who had long ago learned the power of conserving energy. "We have special guests tonight," Jakes continued. "Champions of the body who've come to witness, champions of the spirit. And together, we're raising funds for veterans' rehabilitation programs across this nation." The crowd applauded. Marcus checked the donation tracker on his tablet and smiled. Numbers were already climbing. "And speaking of champions," Jakes's voice shifted slightly, a hint of something, perhaps reservation, coloring his tone. "We have a surprise guest who represents the younger generation of strength. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eli the Beast Carter." The response was mixed. Enthusiastic cheers from younger attendees collided with confused murmurs from older congregants. The music changed abruptly to a pounding beat as Eli bounded onto the stage. Where Jakes moved with measured authority, Eli was all kinetic energy, bouncing on the balls of his feet, pumping his fists, playing to the crowd with exaggerated gestures. His tight black t-shirt displayed a physique sculpted through years of training, the words "Beast Mode" emblazoned across his chest. Diamond studs glinted in both ears. "What's up, Dallas?" Eli grabbed the microphone from its stand, circling the stage like a predator. "Y'all ready to talk about real strength tonight?" Marcus winced at the deviation from script. In rehearsal, Eli was supposed to wait for Jakes's introduction before speaking. Already, the rhythm felt off. Jakes's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes, the briefest flash of annoyance, masked by professional composure. "Our brother Eli here represents a new generation," Jake said, attempting to reclaim the narrative. A generation seeking truth in their own way. That's right, Eli interrupted, clapping Jakes on the shoulder with forced familiarity. A generation that doesn't just talk about strength, we show it. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the congregation. Sister Naomi shifted in her position at the choir stand, eyebrows drawing together slightly. Jakes cleared his throat. As I was saying, tonight is about the intersection of physical discipline and spiritual fortitude. Speaking of physical discipline, Eli cut in again, this time scanning the front row. We've got the legend himself here tonight. Chuck Norris, everybody. The cameras swung to Chuck, who acknowledged the moment with a slight nod, his expression unchanged. Man, your movies were my dad's favorites, Eli continued, laughing. Old school, am I right? Back when special effects were just a guy falling off a building? The comment drew scattered laughter. But a tension had entered the room. A sense that something was veering off course. Marcus pressed his earpiece more firmly against his head. Get ready to cut his mic if needed, he whispered to the audio engineer. Jake stepped forward, Bible raised slightly. Let's remember why we're gathered here tonight, Brother Eli. This isn't about entertainment. It's about enlightenment. Not about showing off strength, but sharing it. No disrespect, Bishop, Eli said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But that's the problem with church these days. All talk, talk, talk. He paced the stage energetically. People out there are struggling. They don't need more words. They need action. A murmur ran through the congregation, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. The cameras caught it all. The diversity of reactions, the subtle shifts in posture, the way certain audience members leaned forward while others drew back. And still, in the front row, Chuck Norris remained motionless, watching everything with those steady eyes that had seen combat both choreographed and real. Nothing in his expression revealed judgment or agreement, only attention. Complete and unwavering. Sister Naomi watched the growing tension from her position, her fingers unconsciously moving to the cross pendant at her throat. She had grown up watching Bishop Jakes on television, his words shaping her understanding of faith long before she'd ever set foot in the Potter's house. To see him challenged on his own stage felt almost sacrilegious. Yet there was something else bothering her. Something in the atmosphere that felt performative, manufactured. The cameras constantly shifting. Marcus's frantic directions in everyone's earpieces. The donation tracker prominently displayed on screens throughout the auditorium. When had worship become so entangled with spectacle? Jakes raised his hand, attempting to redirect the moment. The word tells us that true strength comes not from physical power but from... With all due respect, Bishop, Eli interrupted yet again. People have been hearing that for years while still struggling. Maybe it's time for a new approach. He turned toward the audience, voice rising. How many of you feel strong right now? I mean really strong, not just church strong. Nervous laughter rippled through sections of the congregation. From his control position, Marcus watched the metrics on his screen. Social media engagement was spiking. Hashtags trending. Part of him knew he should rein in this chaotic energy, but another part, the producer in him, recognized compelling content. Stay on both of them, he instructed the camera operators. And get reaction shots from Chuck Norris. Jakes's expression had hardened almost imperceptibly. 20 years of ministry had taught him how to maintain composure under pressure, but the muscle in his jaw tightened as Eli continued playing to the crowd, transforming a sacred space into something more resembling an arena. I respect what you do here, Bishop, Eli said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But let's be real, faith without action is just wishful thinking. He turned toward Chuck again. Mr. Norris knows what I'm talking about, He didn't just talk about fighting in those movies, he showed it. The cameras caught Chuck's expression, still calm, still watching, though perhaps with a slightly more focused intensity than before. "Young man," Jake said, his deep voice cutting through Eli's performance. "Faith is action. The strongest action there is. It moves mountains when your muscles can't even lift a pebble." "No offense," Eli replied with a dismissive laugh, "but I've never seen a prayer lift a 300-pound deadlift." The comment crossed a line. A collective intake of breath swept through the congregation. Sister Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Marcus tensed, finger hovering over the audio kill switch. But Jakes didn't retreat. His voice deepened, took on the cadence that had made him famous, part preacher, part warrior. "The strongest man in this room isn't the one with the biggest muscles, it's the one with the most control over his spirit." He stepped closer to Eli. Bible raised now like a shield. Proverbs 16:32. "Better a patient person than a warrior. One with self-control than one who takes a city." Eli smirked, unimpressed. "With respect, Bishop, I've heard all these verses before. They sound good on Sunday. But on Monday? In the real world?" He shrugged, dramatically. "Not so much." The tension in the room crystallized, hardened into something dangerous. Two forms of strength now stood opposed on stage, one loud and demanding attention, the other grounded in tradition but increasingly provoked. In the front row, Chuck Norris shifted slightly in his seat, the first significant movement he'd made since the exchange began. The camera caught it, lingered on his face. Something in his eyes had changed, not anger, but recognition. He had seen this conflict before, in dojos and film sets and life itself. Ego meeting wisdom, neither willing to yield. The storm that had been gathering now hung suspended, a breath away from breaking. No one, not even Marcus in his production booth with all his cameras and metrics, could have predicted what would happen next. The air in the megachurch seemed to vibrate with tension. Above the stage, massive screens displayed Bishop Jakes and Eli Carter in larger-than-life close-up, their expressions magnified for the thousands present and the millions watching online. Light glinted off the gold embossing of Jakes's Bible as he clutched it tighter. In the front row, Chuck Norris remained the eye of this growing storm, utterly still, while everything around him accelerated toward chaos. "You know what I think?" Eli paced the stage with predatory energy, playing to the cameras he'd spent years mastering. "I think we're afraid to admit that sometimes words fail. Sometimes prayers go unanswered." He spun to face Jakes directly. "Sometimes faith isn't enough." A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Marcus Lee jabbed at his tablet, checking the live stream metrics. Viewership was exploding controversy, driving engagement exactly as he'd hoped. Yet something cold settled in his stomach as he watched the bishop's expression harden. "Young man," Jakes's voice had dropped an octave, resonating with the gravity that had made him famous. "You stand in a house of God. I stand in a building." Eli countered, gesturing at the opulent surroundings. "A really nice one, with great lighting and awesome sound systems. But let's not pretend. You would question faith itself?" Jakes interrupted, stepping closer. "In this sanctuary?" Eli didn't back down. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. We've got real problems out there. Veterans suffering, kids hungry, people dying, and we're in here talking about invisible strength." He turned to the audience. "I mean, who are we kidding?" Sister Naomi watched from the choir stand, her heart racing. This wasn't the inspirational evening she'd prepared for. Her solo, a hymn about finding strength in surrender, now seemed painfully out of place in this escalating confrontation. She glanced at the other choir members, seeing her own unease reflected in their faces. "The problem with your generation," Jake said, struggling to maintain his composure. Isn't lack of faith. It's lack of patience. You want everything instant success, instant answers. And your generation prefers waiting for heaven while suffering on earth. Eli shot back. Times have changed, Bishop. The cameras caught everything, the subtle shifts in body language, the tightening around Jake's eyes, the triumphant smirk playing at the corners of Eli's mouth. The younger man was in his element, creating content, generating controversy. This was exactly how he'd built his following, challenging institutions, provoking reactions, filming the fallout. From his seat, Chuck Norris observed with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades studying human movement. He noted how Jake's breathing had changed, how his grip on the Bible had tightened, how the vein at his temple now pulsed visibly even from a distance. Signs of a man approaching his breaking point. "Brother Eli," Jake said, visibly trying to recenter himself. "You were invited here to bridge worlds, not burn bridges." "I'm just keeping it real," Eli replied with practiced casualness. "Isn't that what Jesus did? Called out the religious leaders of his day, questioned their big shows and fancy prayers." The comparison pushed Jake's to a dangerous edge. The bishop's shoulders rose and fell with deliberate breaths. "Do not," he said slowly, "presume to lecture me on Scripture, young man." In the production booth, Marcus sensed the shifting dynamic. This was no longer the controlled controversy he'd envisioned, this was a powder keg with a lit fuse. He pressed his earpiece. "Get ready to cut to Sister Naomi," he instructed. "We may need to transition fast." But Eli had no intention of allowing a smooth transition. He'd spotted weakness, the crack in Jake's composure, and like any skilled fighter, he moved in for the decisive strike. "See, this is exactly the problem," he said, turning to address the congregation directly. "Question anything, and you're the enemy. Ask for proof, and you're lacking faith." He shook his head dramatically. No wonder young people are leaving churches. The camera cut to audience reactions, uncomfortable shifting, uncertain glances, a few nodding heads, others frowning deeply. The division was visible, palpable. "Real strength," Eli continued, voice rising, "isn't found in a book." He pointed directly at Jake's Bible. "Real strength is proven, tested, demonstrated." He flashed a practiced smile. "Like our guest of honor knows right, Chuck." The camera swung to Chuck Norris, who remained impassive. If he was bothered by being dragged into this spectacle, his face revealed nothing. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mr. Norris didn't become a legend by talking about fighting. Eli pressed on. He got in the ring and showed it. Maybe that's what faith needs, less talk, more. "Enough!" Bishop Jake's voice thundered through the sanctuary, cutting through Eli's performance with the force of a physical blow. The sound technicians scrambled to adjust levels as the speakers momentarily peaked. Jake stepped forward, the full force of his presence radiating outward. This was the man who could hold stadiums spellbound, who had counseled presidents, whose sermons had lifted millions from despair. But in this moment, something else drove him, something dangerously human. "You stand here," Jake said, voice trembling with barely contained emotion. "In a house built by faith, sustained by faith, surrounded by people who have overcome impossible odds through faith, and you mock what you do not understand." Eli opened his mouth to respond, but Jake's wasn't finished. "You speak of demonstration?" The bishop's voice rose further. "You want proof? Look around you. Every soul in this room has a testimony that would shake the foundations of your shallow certainty." Perspiration beaded on Jake's forehead, captured in high definition on the overhead screens. His hands gripped his Bible so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Faith has built hospitals while you build followers. Faith has fed the hungry while you feed your ego. Faith has moved mountains that your muscles could never budge. Something was happening that the carefully crafted program hadn't accounted for: raw emotion breaking through the polished veneer of television ministry. Marcus watched, transfixed, finger still hovering over the button that would cut to Sister Naomi's peaceful hymn. Eli, sensing he'd achieved exactly what he wanted. Authentic reaction. Viral-worthy content. Pressed harder. Then why are there still mountains, Bishop? Why are there still hungry people? His voice dripped with mock innocence. Maybe faith isn't as strong as you think. Sister Naomi watched in horror as Bishop Jakes's face transformed. She had seen him passionate, had seen him forceful, had even seen him angry in righteous moments. But she had never seen this, a man of God pushed beyond his spiritual guardrails into purely human reaction. "Young man," Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you speak of strength, but know nothing of power. True power isn't in showing off. It's in holding back. Is that what you tell yourself?" Eli laughed. "Sounds like an excuse to me." The moment hung, suspended a breath between lightning and thunder. Then it happened. Later, those present would debate whether it was a deliberate act or an unconscious gesture of frustration. Some would claim Jakes had aimed for the floor, others that he'd lost control entirely. Video would be analyzed frame by frame across social media, slowed down, zoomed in, endlessly debated. Bishop T.D. Jakes, his face contorted with an emotion rarely displayed so publicly, drew back his arm and hurled his Bible forward. The heavy book tumbled through the air, leather cover flapping, gold-edged pages catching the light like the wings of some strange bird. It hit the stage with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly silent sanctuary, then skidded across the polished surface, and came to rest directly at the feet of Chuck Norris. Time seemed to stop. Thousands of eyes fixed on that Bible, then rose to the man before whom it had landed. Chuck hadn't moved, hadn't flinched when the book slid toward him, hadn't reacted visibly to the shocking display of emotion that had preceded it. The cameras captured everything in merciless clarity. Jakes frozen in the aftermath of his action, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized what he'd done. Eli's expression shifting from mockery to stunned disbelief. Sister Naomi's hand pressed against her mouth. The congregation's collective shock. Eli recovered first, seizing the moment with the instincts of a born performer. "Wow," he exclaimed, spreading his arms theatrically. "Looks like even the bishops resorting to throwing punches or Bibles, in this case." A few nervous laughs broke the silence, quickly stifled. Most of the congregation remained frozen, witnessing something they'd never expected to see: their spiritual leader, known for his control and wisdom, succumbing to the very pride and anger he preached against. Jake seemed to shrink before their eyes, the magnitude of his action hitting him like a physical force. His shoulders slumped, his imposing presence diminished by the weight of immediate regret. The Bible lay there, still not just a book but now a symbol of sacred things, handled carelessly, of wisdom abandoned in anger, of human frailty overcoming spiritual discipline. And before it stood Chuck Norris, who had remained unmoving through the entire exchange, a study in self-control amid escalating chaos. Until now. With the deliberate slowness of a man who has never needed to rush, Chuck Norris rose from his seat. The movement, simple as it was, silenced even the whispers that had begun to spread through the congregation. Every eye turned to him. Every camera swiveled. Even the air in the massive space seemed to still, waiting. Chuck stood straight, not imposing by height, but by presence. He wore no flashy clothes, displayed no dramatic expressions, made no grand gestures. Yet somehow, his simple act of standing commanded more attention than all of Eli's performances or even Jake's thunderous preaching. This was a different kind of authority, quiet, certain, earned through decades rather than demanded in moments. His eyes moved from Jake's to Eli, then down to the Bible at his feet. His face remained unreadable, not blank, but contained, like still water that runs impossibly deep. Marcus Lee, watching from the production booth, realized he'd been holding his breath. The live stream comments were exploding, but for once, he wasn't checking the metrics. Some moments transcended viewership numbers, and instinctively, he knew this was one of them. Sister Naomi found herself frozen in place, the hymn she'd prepared forgotten. The choir around her seemed equally transfixed, watching the scene unfold with the rest of the congregation. "Oh my," Eli said, breaking the silence with forced bravado. "Looks like we've got Chuck Norris joining the conversation." He gestured toward the front row. "Coming up to defend the faith? Chuck?" The words rang hollow in the vast space. A performer whose script had suddenly proved inadequate for the moment at hand. Chuck didn't acknowledge Eli's taunt. His attention remained fixed on the Bible lying at his feet, not just a book, but now the focal point of a conflict between ego and humility, between reaction and response, between human impulse and spiritual discipline. He bent down slowly, a movement possessing the fluid economy of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting the relationship between intention and action. His hand extended toward the Bible. The congregation collectively held its breath. Bishop Jakes stood frozen on stage, the magnitude of his action written across his face. In that moment, he wasn't the famous preacher, the spiritual leader, the television personality. He was simply a man confronting his own humanity, his own failure to embody the very principles he espoused. And now Chuck Norris, a man known for his fists, was reaching for the Bible that anger had cast aside. No one could have predicted what would happen next, not Marcus in his production booth with all his cameras and analytics, not Sister Naomi with her prepared hymn about finding strength in surrender, not the thousands in attendance or the millions watching online. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between scandal and redemption. Chuck's fingers closed around the Bible. The Bible felt heavy in Chuck Norris's hands, heavier than its physical weight should account for. Perhaps it was the symbolic burden it now carried, cast down in a moment of human frailty, now lifted in silent deliberation. The megachurch remained unnaturally quiet, as if the collective breath of thousands had been suspended. On the massive screens overhead, cameras captured Chuck's face in unforgiving close-up, the lines earned through decades of living, the steady eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. He straightened slowly, Bible held respectfully between his hands. The gilt-edged pages caught the stage lights, glinting like gold. Bishop T. D. Jake stood motionless on stage, the aftermath of his action visible in his posture, shoulders slightly hunched, hands open at his sides, face etched with regret. The formidable presence that had commanded this space minutes earlier had contracted into something painfully human. His eyes never left Chuck, silently acknowledging the gravity of what had transpired. Eli Carter shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncharacteristically silent. His smirk had faded, replaced by uncertainty. He'd wanted controversy, conflict, content, but not this. The atmosphere had shifted beyond his ability to manipulate or perform within. From her position at the choir stand, Sister Naomi found herself unconsciously humming not the triumphant hymn she'd prepared, but something softer, more plaintive. Amazing Grace. The melody provided an emotional anchor in this unscripted moment that had veered so far from the planned program. In the production booth, Marcus Lee watched the metrics scrolling across his screens with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal unease. The live stream numbers were exploding. Social media engagement spiking off the charts, number Bible Throne and number Chuck Norris reacts already trending. The producer in him recognized this as television gold. The man of faith in him recognized it as something far more complex. "Stay with Chuck," he instructed the camera operators. Tight on his face, then widened to include Jake's. Chuck stepped forward, moving with the deliberate economy that had defined his martial arts career. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. Every eye in the sanctuary followed him as he approached the steps leading to the stage. Eli found his voice first, attempting to reclaim control of the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with forced enthusiasm, "Chuck Norris is entering the ring. This should be interesting." The attempt at humor fell flat in the charged atmosphere. A few uncomfortable coughs echoed through the space, but most remained silent, sensing that something profound was unfolding, something that transcended entertainment. Chuck ascended the steps, his movement smooth despite his age. The Bible remained held before him, not brandished like a weapon or trophy, but carried with evident respect. Bishop Jakes took an uncertain step forward, then stopped, visibly struggling to find appropriate words for an inappropriate action. "Brother Norris," he began, his voice stripped of its usual resonant authority. Chuck raised a hand slightly, not dismissively, but with quiet assurance. The gesture alone was enough to silence the famous preacher. Standing now center stage, Chuck commanded attention without demanding it, a presence built through decades of discipline rather than moments of drama. The contrast between his composed stillness and the emotional turbulence that had preceded him could not have been more stark. He glanced down at the Bible in his hands, then raised his eyes to meet Jakes' gaze directly. "The weight of this," Chuck said, his voice surprisingly gentle yet carrying effortlessly through the silent sanctuary, "isn't meant to be thrown." Simple words, delivered without judgment or condemnation, yet they resonated with unmistakable truth. The sanctuary remained utterly still, hanging on each syllable from a man known more for action than speech. Jakes' eyes glistened with emotion, recognition, regret, respect. He nodded once, accepting both the rebuke and the dignity with which it was offered. But Eli, seeing his moment of viral fame slipping away, couldn't resist inserting himself back into the narrative. He stepped forward, clapping his hands together loudly. "That's it?" He laughed, though the sound rang hollow. "The great Chuck Norris finally speaks, and all we get is some fortune cookie wisdom?" He turned to the audience with exaggerated disappointment. "I was expecting roundhouse kicks, not Sunday school lessons." Chuck turned slowly to face the younger man. Nothing in his expression suggested anger or irritation, only a calm assessment, the look of someone who had encountered countless challenges and recognized their true nature. "Young man," Chuck said, his tone unchanged, "you speak of strength, as if it's only measured in pounds lifted or punches thrown." "Well, yeah," Eli responded with forced bravado. "That's how the world works. Results. Proof. Action. Action." Chuck nodded slightly. "I agree, but not all action is external." He gestured toward Jakes, including him in the conversation without judgment. The bishop lost control for a moment. "We all do. That's human." He turned back to Eli. "But true strength isn't found in never falling, it's found in how you rise afterward." Sister Naomi's humming had grown just loud enough to be picked up by the nearby microphones. Amazing grace, flowing like a gentle current beneath the tense exchange. Several choir members had begun to join her, adding subtle harmony to the spontaneous undercurrent. Eli shifted uncomfortably, his performance persona faltering under Chuck's steady gaze. "Look, I respect you, Mr. Norris. You're a legend. But with all due respect, this spiritual stuff sounds great in theory. But in the real world, power gets results." Chuck considered this for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Then he extended the Bible toward Eli, not thrusting it, but offering it. "Take it," he said simply. Confusion flickered across Eli's face. "What?" "Take the Bible," Chuck repeated. "Hold it for a moment." Hesitantly, Eli accepted the book, clearly uncertain where this was leading. "Now," Chuck continued, his voice still measured and calm, "if you truly believe physical power is superior to spiritual discipline, strike me." A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. Cameras zoomed in tighter, capturing every nuance of the unexpected challenge. Eli blinked rapidly, thrown completely off script. "What? You want me to hit you?" Chuck nodded once. "You believe in demonstrable strength. Here's your chance to demonstrate it." He stood completely open, making no move to defend himself. "Show everyone that power speaks louder than restraint." The challenge hung in the air, not aggressive, not a trap, but a genuine invitation to prove a philosophy. Eli glanced around uncertainly, suddenly aware of the thousands of eyes upon him, the cameras broadcasting his every expression to millions more. The Bible felt awkward in his hands, an unfamiliar weight, a symbol he had dismissed but never truly engaged with. "This is ridiculous," he said finally, attempting to laugh it off. "I'm not going to hit a 70-year-old man on live television." "Why not?" Chuck asked quietly. "If physical strength is what you truly value most, what you believe changes the world, then my age shouldn't matter. Power is power, by your definition." Bishop Jakes watched this exchange with growing awareness, something shifting in his expression as the lesson unfolded not just for Eli, but for himself as well. Sister Naomi's spontaneous hymn had grown subtly stronger, other choir members joining in harmony. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." The simple melody provided a poignant counterpoint to the tense confrontation. Eli stood frozen in indecision, the Bible in one hand, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of authentic challenge. "This isn't... that's not what I... It isn't about hitting or not hitting," Chuck said gently. "It's about recognizing that the strongest action sometimes is choosing not to act. The greatest power often lies in restraint." He turned slightly, including both Eli and Jakes in his gaze. "I've spent my life training my body to fight. But the hardest battles aren't won with fists. They're won here." He touched his temple lightly. "And here." His hand moved to his heart. The sanctuary remained utterly silent, except for the soft undercurrent of Sister Naomi's hymn. Even Marcus Lee in his production booth had stopped issuing directions, transfixed by the unscripted moment of truth unfolding on his monitors. Chuck turned back to Eli. "The strength you mock, the faith you dismiss, has built hospitals in places your muscles could never reach. It's comforted the dying when no physical power could save them. It's changed hearts when fists could only break bones." He gestured toward the Bible still clutched awkwardly in Eli's hands. "That book isn't just words on pages, it's a testament to the kind of strength that outlasts empires." The sanctuary had fallen completely silent now. Even Sister Naomi's humming had paused. Every person present, sensing that they were witnessing something profound, not a spectacle, but a revelation. Eli looked down at the Bible in his hands, then back at Chuck, his carefully constructed persona cracking under the weight of authentic challenge. He began, then faltered. For perhaps the first time in his public life, Eli, the beast. Carter found himself without a ready response, without a performance to hide behind. In that moment of vulnerability, something shifted in the atmosphere, an almost tangible release of tension, as if the congregation had collectively exhaled. Chuck nodded slightly, understanding without judgment. He turned to Bishop Jakes, who stood watching with a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face: shame at his own lapse in control, awe at the lesson unfolding before him, humility in the face of quiet wisdom. "Bishop," Chuck said, extending his hand, "I believe this belongs to you." The gesture was simple, but its significance reverberated through the sanctuary. This wasn't just about returning a physical object, it was an invitation to reclaim purpose, to remember what truly mattered beyond the cameras and trending hashtags. Jake stepped forward, his expression open and vulnerable in a way few had ever seen from the famous preacher. He accepted the Bible from Eli's unresisting hands, holding it close to his chest. "Thank you, brother," he said quietly to Chuck. Then, turning to face the congregation, his voice strengthened. "And I ask forgiveness from all of you. I allowed frustration to overcome wisdom. I preached control but failed to practice it." The admission, raw, honest, unscripted, hung in the air for a moment. Then, something remarkable happened. Scattered applause began, quickly growing into a wave of support. Not celebration of spectacle, but recognition of authentic humanity. From her position at the choir stand, Sister Naomi felt tears welling in her eyes. This wasn't the polished performance she'd expected to witness tonight. It was something far more valuable: truth breaking through the careful staging. Real faith emerging from beneath the trappings of religious entertainment. Almost without conscious thought, she began to sing not the rehearsed solo she'd prepared, but the hymn that had been building within her. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Her voice, pure and powerful, floated above the congregation. Other choir members joined in, the simple melody spreading through the sanctuary like healing water. In the production booth, Marcus Lee watched the unexpected turn of events with conflicting emotions. The producer in him recognized that this had veered completely off script, off brand, off message. The metrics were still exploding, but not for the reasons he'd planned. Yet something deeper within him recognized the value of what was unfolding. Something authentic, breaking through the careful packaging of faith, something that no amount of production value could have manufactured. On stage, the three men stood in a tableau that told a story more powerful than any the event planners had scripted. The preacher humbled, the performer silenced, the warrior peaceful. And between them, the Bible no longer a prop or a projectile, but restored to its purpose as a symbol of something beyond human ego. As Sister Naomi's voice filled the sanctuary, Chuck Norris stepped back. His role in this moment, complete. He had not fought. He had not preached. He had simply stood in truth. And in doing so, had demonstrated the greatest strength of all. The Potter's House megachurch hung suspended in a moment of collective emotional surrender. Sister Naomi's clear voice carrying the timeless words of "amazing grace" to every corner of the vast space. The spontaneous hymn had broken through the carefully constructed program like sunlight through storm clouds. On stage, Bishop T.D. Jake stood with his Bible held close, his face revealing a man reconnecting with his deepest purpose beyond cameras and acclaim. Beside him, Eli Carter remained uncharacteristically still, his usual kinetic energy subdued by something he hadn't anticipated encountering tonight: authentic humility. And Chuck Norris, having delivered his gentle yet powerful message, had stepped back slightly, content to remove himself from the spotlight he had never sought. As the final notes of the hymn faded, a reverent silence settled over the congregation. Not the awkward pause of a program gone awry, but the sacred stillness of thousands of souls collectively processing something genuine. Jakes looked down at the Bible in his hands, then raised his eyes to address the congregation. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual performative power. Instead, it resonated with something more valuable: honesty. "My brothers and sisters," he began, "tonight, I stand before you, not as your pastor, but as a fellow traveler, on this journey of faith, a traveler who stumbled." He glanced at Chuck, who nodded slightly in encouragement. "I've preached control for decades," Jakes continued. "I've spoken of mastering our emotions, of letting wisdom guide our actions. Yet, in a moment of frustration, I failed to embody that very teaching." He held up his Bible. "This sacred text is not a weapon to be wielded in anger. It's a light to guide us through darkness, including the darkness of our own pride." In the production booth, Marcus Lee watched the unfolding scene with growing awareness that something unprecedented was happening. The carefully timed segments, the planned transitions, the scripted moments designed to maximize donation pledges, all had been rendered irrelevant by this unexpected turn toward authenticity. Yet the metrics scrolling across his screens told a remarkable story. Viewership wasn't dropping, it was surging. Comments were flooding in, not with the usual emoji reactions or shallow engagement, but with expressions of genuine emotion. People weren't just watching, they were witnessing. "Stay with this," he instructed his team quietly. "No cuts, no graphics. Just let it breathe." On stage, Jakes turned to Eli, whose usual confident posture had given way to something more uncertain. "Brother Eli," the bishop said, "you came here to challenge us. And perhaps that was exactly what we needed. Not in the way either of us expected, but in the way God intended." Eli shifted his weight, visibly uncomfortable with being addressed, not as a performer or provocateur, but as a person. I didn't mean to cause." His voice trailed off, the practiced lines and rehearsed confidence suddenly inadequate for this unscripted moment of truth. Chuck Norris, who had remained quietly present but unobtrusive, now stepped forward again. His movements carried the same economy of motion, nothing wasted, nothing for show. When he spoke, his voice remained measured but reached every corner of the silent sanctuary. "There's a principle in martial arts," he said, "that the student who challenges the master often teaches the entire dojo." He glanced between Jakes and Eli. "Tonight, I think we've all been both students and teachers." He turned to address the congregation directly for the first time. Thousands leaned forward slightly, phones lowered, attention undivided. Chuck Norris, a man who had spent decades in the spotlight, commanded it now, without seeking it through presence, rather than performance. "I've spent my life training in disciplines that could harm," he said simply. "But the greatest lesson I've learned is when not to use what I know." He looked at Eli. "You asked for a demonstration of strength. Real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about mastering yourself." Sister Naomi, watching from her position with the choir, felt a chill run through her. This wasn't the inspirational celebrity appearance she'd expected when she'd arrived tonight. This was something far more valuable: wisdom cutting through spectacle, truth piercing performance. Eli, still struggling to find his footing in this unscripted moment, attempted to reclaim some measure of his familiar persona. "Look, I respect what you're saying, Mr. Norris. But in the real world, actions speak louder than words?" Chuck finished for him, not unkindly. "I agree. Which is why I'm going to invite you to take action now." A ripple of uncertainty moved through the congregation. Marcus leaned forward in the production booth, unsure what was about to unfold. "Strike me," Chuck said quietly. The words hung in the air. Simple, yet shocking. Cameras tightened on both men's faces, Chuck's calm and open, Eli's increasingly uncertain. What? Eli managed, his voice cracking slightly. You believe in demonstrable strength, Chuck said. Here's your opportunity to demonstrate it. No cameras, no tricks, no stunts. Just you and me. He stood completely open, making no move to defend himself. Show everyone what real power looks like. Bishop Jakes watched with growing understanding, recognizing the lesson unfolding not just for Eli, but for himself and every person present. Eli glanced around at the thousands watching, at the cameras broadcasting his reaction to millions more. Sweat beaded on his forehead. This is ridiculous, he said, attempting a dismissive laugh that fell flat in the charged atmosphere. I'm not going to hit you. Why not? Chuck asked, his voice remaining gentle. If physical strength is what truly matters, what truly changes the world, then my age shouldn't matter. Power is power. By your definition. Eli's carefully constructed image was crumbling visibly. The social media personality who had built a following by challenging authority now found himself cornered not by force, but by wisdom. I respect you, man, he stammered. It isn't about hitting or not hitting, Chuck said. It's about understanding that sometimes the strongest action is choosing not to act. True power often reveals itself in restraint. Sister Naomi found herself holding her breath along with the entire congregation. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was illumination. The strength you mock, Chuck continued. The faith you dismiss. It's built hospitals where your fists could never reach. It's comforted the dying when physical power could offer nothing. It's changed hearts when force could only break bodies. He glanced at Jakes, including him in the lesson. And yes, sometimes even those of us who understand this truth forget to live it in moments of frustration. Jakes nodded, accepting both the rebuke and the grace with which it was offered. Eli stood frozen, caught between his carefully crafted public persona and the authentic moment demanding honest response. His expression shifted between defiance and uncertainty, the cameras capturing every nuance of his internal struggle. I don't, he began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find words that weren't performative. Chuck nodded, understanding without judgment. It's not easy to step out of the role we've created for ourselves, he said gently. Whether that role is the tough guy, he glanced at Eli, the unshakable preacher, a respectful nod to Jakes, or the action hero. This last with a small, self-deprecating smile. The congregation remained utterly still. Thousands of people, collectively holding their breath as something genuine unfolded before them. Not the polished spectacle they'd come to consume, but truth they hadn't known they were hungry for. In the silence, Eli's defensive posture gradually softened. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor of arrogance, a glimpse of the uncertain young man beneath the brash exterior. He said finally, his voice stripped of its usual performative confidence. I just want to matter, to make a difference, not just be forgotten. The simple admission, perhaps the first wholly authentic thing he'd said all evening, hung in the air. Not a performance, not a provocation. Just human vulnerability laid bare. Chuck's expression remained kind, but his eyes held Eli's gaze with steady intensity. Making noise isn't the same as making a difference, he said quietly. Being remembered isn't the same as being meaningful. He glanced around at the vast sanctuary, taking in the thousands of witnesses, the cameras, the production value that had transformed worship into entertainment. We're all guilty of confusing attention with impact, he continued. Views with value. Controversy with contribution. Bishop Jake stepped forward then, his own expression reflecting a similar recognition. Brother Chuck speaks truth, he said. His voice carrying not through volume, but through newfound authenticity. I've built this ministry to reach millions, but tonight I'm reminded that reach means nothing if we lose our grasp on what truly matters. Sister Naomi, watching from her position with the choir, felt tears welling in her eyes. The mask of religious celebrity had cracked open to reveal something far more valuable: human truth, seeking divine connection. But Eli, though shaken, wasn't yet ready to surrender completely. Something of his performer's instinct reasserted itself, a desperate grasp for familiar ground. This is all very inspirational, he said, attempting to reclaim some measure of his swagger, but people don't tune in for sermons anymore. They want spectacle? Chuck suggested gently. Entertainment? Conflict? I know something about that world too. He took a step closer to Eli, not threatening but direct. I've spent decades in front of cameras. I've made my living appearing stronger, tougher, more invincible than I am. But when the lights go down and the cameras stop rolling, that's when the real work begins. The sanctuary remained utterly silent. Thousands of witnesses to this unexpected collision of celebrity and sincerity, performance and purpose. So, Chuck said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the stillness. You have a choice now, young man. You can continue playing the role you've created. The provocateur. The challenger. The self-proclaimed beast. He paused, his steady gaze never leaving Eli's increasingly uncertain expression. Or you can put down that burden and discover who you might be when you're not performing. What strength you might find when you're not flexing for the camera. The challenge hung in the air, not aggressive, not a trap, but an invitation to authenticity that cut through all pretense. In the production booth, Marcus Lee had stopped checking metrics entirely. The producer had given way to the person, recognizing that what was unfolding transcended viewership numbers and engagement analytics. This wasn't content anymore, it was communion. On stage, Eli Carter stood at a crossroads, the carefully constructed persona that had built his following now crumbling under the weight of genuine challenge. The swagger, the provocative comments, the constant performance all suddenly seemed hollow compared to the quiet authenticity standing before him. The congregation watched, collectively holding its breath. Sister Naomi prayed silently from her position with the choir. Bishop Jake stood with his Bible held close, his own journey from performance to authenticity reflected in his compassionate gaze. And Chuck Norris waited patiently, a man who had nothing to prove and therefore embodied true strength. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between spectacle and sincerity, between the storm of ego and the silence of truth. What happened next would change everything. No one saw it coming, least of all Chuck Norris. Eli, the Beast. Carter's social media sensation, professional provocateur, master of manufactured controversy, moved with the explosive speed that had made him famous in the fighting world. One moment he stood seemingly defeated by quiet wisdom. The next he lunged forward, right arm cocked back, muscles coiled to deliver a blow born of desperate pride and cornered ego. A collective gasp ripped through the congregation. Phones lifted higher to capture the unthinkable moment. Bishop Jakes stepped forward instinctively, though too far away to intervene. Sister Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, a prayer caught in her throat. In the production booth, Marcus Lee froze, horrified and transfixed by what was unfolding on his monitors. The punch came fast, fueled by humiliation, by the desperate need to reassert control over a narrative that had slipped beyond Eli's grasp. His face contorted with the effort, sweat flying from his brow as his fist cut through the air toward Chuck Norris's undefended face. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, though in reality it took less than a second. Chuck, despite his age, despite having made no visible preparation to defend himself, moved with the fluid precision of someone to whom martial discipline was not just training but nature. No wasted motion, no dramatic evasion, just the slightest shift in weight, a minimal turn of his upper body. Eli's punch, thrown with all his considerable strength, met nothing but air. The momentum of his failed strike carried him forward, off balance and vulnerable. Chuck's hand rose not to counterattack, but to stabilize. He caught Eli's extended arm gently but firmly, redirecting the younger man's energy and preventing him from falling. For a breathless moment, they stood frozen in this tableau, Eli off balance and supported by the very man he'd attempted to strike. Chuck, steady and composed, having neutralized aggression not with greater force but with perfect control. When Chuck released him, Eli stumbled back a step, his expression a complex mixture of shock, shame, and dawning recognition. The sanctuary remained utterly silent, thousands witnessing not the violent spectacle some might have anticipated, but something far more powerful. Force, transformed into grace. Attack met with protection rather than retaliation. "That," Chuck said quietly, his voice somehow reaching every corner of the silent sanctuary, "is what I meant by strength." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't struck back. He hadn't humiliated his attacker. In the face of aggression, he had responded with the minimum necessary action, protecting himself while simultaneously protecting Eli from the consequences of his own impulse. Bishop Jakes, who had been poised to intervene, slowly lowered his outstretched hand. His expression reflected growing understanding not just of Chuck's physical discipline, but of the deeper spiritual principle it embodied. Eli stood frozen, his carefully constructed persona shattered completely. The mask of arrogant provocation had fallen away, revealing the face of a young man confronting his own weakness, perhaps for the first time in public. He began, but words failed him. Chuck's expression held no judgment, no triumph, no desire to press his advantage. Instead, he extended his hand not to restrain this time, but to offer connection. "The hardest opponent we ever face," he said gently, "is the one in the mirror." Something broke in Eli. Then not his pride being crushed, but his defenses cracking open to allow something authentic to emerge. His shoulders slumped, his combative stance dissolved. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual performative confidence. "How did you?" He gestured vaguely at the space between them, unable to fully articulate his question. "Years of practice," Chuck answered simply. "Not just of technique, but of patience, of choosing response over reaction." He glanced toward Bishop Jakes, including him in this moment of teaching. "It's not so different from what the bishop preaches, mastering our impulses, finding strength in restraint rather than release." Jakes nodded, a complex emotion playing across his features. Humility at his own earlier failure to embody this principle, respect for the man now demonstrating it, hope for the redemptive moment unfolding before them all. In the choir stand, Sister Naomi felt something shift in the atmosphere. The tension that had built to this explosive moment, now dissolving into something gentler, more profound. Without conscious thought, she began to sing again. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." Other choir members joined her voice, the simple melody spreading through the sanctuary like healing balm. This time, it wasn't just background to the unfolding drama, it was its emotional counterpoint, offering language for the wordless transformation happening on stage. Eli stood in the center of this storm of grace, visibly struggling to process what had just happened, not just Chuck's physical mastery, but the larger lesson it embodied. His features cycled through confusion, shame, anger, and finally, something approaching wonder. "You could have destroyed me just now," he said quietly. "On camera. In front of everyone. You had every right." Chuck shook his head slightly. "Rights have nothing to do with it. What would that have accomplished? Except to replace your mistake with mine." He gestured around, at the thousands watching, at the cameras broadcasting this moment worldwide. Violence creates more violence. Humiliation breeds resentment. Neither changes hearts. Bishop Jakes stepped forward then, his Bible held close, but no longer as a shield or symbol of authority, now simply as a source of grounding wisdom. "Proverbs tells us," he said, his voice finding its depth again, though without its earlier performative quality. "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." He looked at Chuck with newfound respect, then at Eli with compassion. "I forgot that truth earlier tonight. Brother Chuck just embodied it." The congregation remained spellbound, witnessing something few had expected when they arrived for this charity event. Not just inspiration, but transformation. Not performance, but truth. In the production booth, Marcus Lee watched with a strange mixture of professional awe and personal revelation. The metrics were unprecedented: viewership spiking, social media exploding, donation pledges flooding in, yet somehow those numbers, which had driven every production decision until now, suddenly seemed secondary to the authentic moment unfolding on his screens. On stage, Eli took a deep, shuddering breath, perhaps his first honest one of the evening. When he spoke, his voice carried none of its usual calculated bravado. "I don't know how to be anything except what people expect," he admitted, the words seeming to surprise even himself. "The beast. The provocateur. The guy who says what others won't." Chuck nodded, understanding without judgment. "Personas become cages if we're not careful," he said. "I know something about that too." He glanced around at the massive sanctuary, taking in the production value, the cameras, the carefully crafted environment designed to maximize impact and influence. "We all get caught up in the roles we play," he continued, including Jake's, and by extension, everyone present in his gentle observation. The action hero, the fiery preacher, the social media rebel. But those are costumes, not identities. Sister Naomi's voice rose slightly as the choir's harmonies deepened beneath her melody. "I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see." The words seemed to pierce Eli's remaining defenses. Something glistened in his eyes. Not performance tears for the camera, but genuine emotion breaking through. "How do you?" he began, then swallowed hard. "How do I find who I really am beneath all this?" The question hung in the air, not just Eli's personal struggle, but a universal human question that resonated through the sanctuary. In that moment, he wasn't the arrogant influencer who had disrupted the event. He was simply a young man asking for guidance. Chuck's expression softened further. "You begin by being still," he said simply. "By listening more than speaking, by finding value in who you are, not just what you accomplish or how many people watch." He placed a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder, not restraining now, but supporting. "The path isn't always dramatic or camera-ready. Real growth happens in quiet moments, not viral ones." Bishop Jakes stepped closer, adding his presence to this unexpected moment of mentorship. "The scripture says, 'Be still, and know that I am God,'" he quoted softly. Perhaps that's where all authentic strength begins, in stillness, not spectacle. The three men stood together on stage, no longer adversaries, no longer representing opposing philosophies, but fellow travelers on a journey toward authentic living. The image, captured by dozens of cameras and broadcast to millions worldwide, conveyed something words could not fully express: the possibility of transformation through grace rather than force. Sister Naomi's voice carried the final verse of the hymn, the choir swelling beneath her. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright, shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. As the final notes faded, a profound silence settled over the sanctuary. Not the awkward pause of a program gone off the rails, but the sacred stillness of a moment of collective recognition. Something genuine had broken through the carefully constructed surface of religious entertainment. Eli stood, with his head slightly bowed, no longer performing for the cameras, no longer seeking to dominate the narrative. Bishop Jakes watched with an expression of newfound humility, his own journey from frustration to wisdom visible in his gentle gaze. And Chuck Norris, who had come seeking neither spotlight nor conflict, stood as he had throughout, present, contained, embodying the strength of stillness. In that moment of suspended time, before the world would analyze and repackage what had just transpired, before social media would explode with clips and commentaries, before this unscripted confrontation would be transformed back into content, in that precious pause, truth hung suspended in the air, available to anyone willing to embrace it. The strongest retaliation against force is not greater force, but transformation. The most powerful response to aggression is not counterattack, but redirection toward growth. This was Chuck Norris's true retaliation, not defeating an opponent, but creating an opportunity for everyone present to discover a deeper definition of strength. As the congregation slowly began to stir, as the reality of what they had witnessed settled in their consciousness, as phones lifted to capture this moment for posterity, one truth became undeniable. In the face of a thrown Bible and a thrown punch, the most shocking response had been neither anger nor violence, but grace. And that, truly, was the retaliation that would shock the world. Dawn broke over Dallas, sunlight gradually illuminating a city, transformed by what had transpired within the walls of the Potter's house. While the megachurch stood physically unchanged, the ripples of last night's confrontation spread outward in ever-widening circles. Marcus Lee sat alone in his production office, surrounded by screens displaying the aftermath. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, as the events he'd witnessed continued to unfold across every platform and news outlet. Chuck Norris Retaliation was trending worldwide. Video clips had been viewed hundreds of millions of times. Commentators debated whether it had been staged or genuine, a publicity stunt or divine intervention. Marcus knew the truth. He'd been there in the control booth, had seen the genuine shock on every face, including his own, as the unscripted moment of transformation unfolded before them all. His phone buzzed again, another network offering an exclusive interview, another opportunity to capitalize on the viral moment of the year. He let it go to voicemail, as he had with dozens before it. Something had shifted within him last night. The producer who had orchestrated countless moments of manufactured inspiration, who had transformed worship into content, who had measured success in metrics and engagement, that person seemed suddenly like a stranger. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Bishop T.D. Jakes stood in the doorway, somehow both the commanding presence Marcus had worked with for years and someone new, humbled, grounded, transformed. "I couldn't sleep," Jakes admitted, entering the office. "Too much to process." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "It's everywhere. We've never had engagement numbers like this." He stopped himself, suddenly aware of how hollow those metrics seemed in light of what had actually happened. Jakes noticed the shift in his expression. "Numbers," he said gently. We've both built our careers on them, haven't we? Viewers, followers, engagement. He shook his head slightly. Last night, I was reminded of what those numbers can never measure. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it automatically, then froze. "It's from Eli Carter's team," he said, scanning the message with disbelief. "He's posted a video." He brought the video up on his main screen. Both men fell silent as the image appeared. Eli sitting alone in what appeared to be a hotel room. No production value. No lighting setup. Just a young man looking directly into his phone camera, eyes reddened, face stripped of its usual swagger. "Hey everyone," the on-screen Eli began, voice lacking its customary bombastic confidence. "No fancy intro today. No hype. No beast mode." He swallowed visibly. "Just me. Whoever that is." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a gesture of genuine uncertainty that neither Marcus nor Jakes had ever seen from the carefully curated social media personality. "Last night, I went to the Potter's house with a plan," Eli continued. "Create controversy. Get reactions. Make content. It's what I do, what I've built my whole brand around." He shook his head slightly. "But something happened that I wasn't prepared for. Something real. I challenged Bishop Jakes because I knew he'd react. I pushed his buttons deliberately because conflict drives engagement." Eli's voice cracked slightly. "That's the game, right? That's what we've all been playing. Pastors, influencers, media, everyone, packaging truth into content, measuring value in views." Eli's eyes glistened as he looked back at the camera. "When I swung at Chuck Norris, and yes, that really happened, it wasn't staged. I was trying to regain control of a narrative that had slipped away from me. I was trying to force my way back into a position of power." He shook his head in evident disbelief at his own actions. "And he just redirected me, protected me from myself, showed me what actual strength looks like. I don't know who I am without the hype, without the provocation, without the constant performance. But I want to find out. So I'm taking a break from social media, from posting, from performing, from the constant need to be seen and heard." A slight smile touched his lips. Not his camera-ready grin, but something more vulnerable. "Chuck Norris has invited me to spend time at his ranch. Not for publicity, not for content, just for growth. And I've accepted." The video ended, leaving Marcus and Jakes in stunned silence. "I didn't expect that," Marcus finally said quietly. Jakes nodded thoughtfully. "I think we're all being challenged to find something more authentic than what we've been cultivating." Sister Naomi Brooks sat in her small apartment, her phone turned off despite the constant barrage of interview requests. Her recorded version of Amazing Grace had reached the top of the gospel charts overnight, a dream come true by any objective measure. Yet she found herself seeking solitude rather than celebrating success. Something profound had shifted within her during those unscripted moments on stage, watching human ego crumble, witnessing genuine transformation, feeling the Holy Spirit move not through careful programming but through disrupted plans. A gentle knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find her choir director, an older woman who had mentored her for years. "They're saying your career is about to explode," the older woman said, without preamble. "Record deals, television appearances, your own tour." Naomi nodded, acknowledging this without the excitement such prospects would normally elicit. "I know." The choir director studied her face. "Yet you don't seem thrilled." "I'm trying to understand what actually happened last night," Naomi said quietly. "Not just the viral moment, But what was really happening beneath all that? What do you think was happening? Naomi considered this carefully. I think we've all been playing roles performers in a spiritual production, all of us contributing to this spectacle of faith. She shook her head slightly. But when Chuck Norris stood there, when he didn't play his assigned role, when he just existed in authentic truth, something broke through. And now I'm wondering what it means to sing not for effect, but from essence, Naomi said. What it means to worship not as performance, but as presence. Her mentor smiled gently. That, my dear, is the question that has faced every generation of believers since the beginning. The tension between expression and exhibition, between proclamation and performance. 1 week later, Bishop T.D. Jakes stood before his congregation not on the main stage with its theatrical lighting and camera platforms, but in a smaller chapel within the Potter's House complex. No broadcast, no live stream, no production team orchestrating the experience. Just a shepherd with his flock, seeking authentic connection. Last week, many of you witnessed something unexpected. He began, his voice carrying not through volume, but through sincerity. You saw your pastor fail to practice what he preaches. You saw anger overcome wisdom, ego eclipse purpose. He held up his Bible, the same one that had skidded across the stage in that moment of lost control. For that, I ask your forgiveness. Not just for the action itself, but for the distance that had grown between the message I proclaim and the life I was living. The congregation remained silent, sensing the weight of this moment, their leader not performing inspiration but embodying vulnerability. But something else happened that night. Jakes continued. We witnessed what happens when authentic truth breaks through carefully constructed image. When genuine strength confronts performative power. He gestured to the side, where Chuck Norris sat quietly. Not as a celebrity guest, but as a fellow believer seeking community. Our brother Chuck reminded us all what it means to retaliate with grace rather than force, to respond rather than react, to transform conflict into opportunity for growth. In the front row, Eli Carter sat with eyes forward. Attention, undivided. No phone. No social media. No audience beyond those physically present. The week spent at Chuck's ranch had begun a transformation still in its earliest stages but already visible in his quieter demeanor, his willingness to listen rather than perform. Beside him, Sister Naomi smoothed her simple dress, not the elaborate choir robe she typically wore for services. When she would sing today, it would not be as a featured soloist with spotlights and camera close-ups, but as one voice among many, seeking harmony rather than prominence. As Bishop Jakes opened his Bible to begin the morning's teaching, Marcus Lee slipped quietly into a seat in the back row. He had resigned his position as production director the day before, uncertain of his next steps but certain that he could no longer approach ministry as media content. Some truths couldn't be packaged, they could only be lived. Beyond the walls of the Potter's House, the viral moment continued rippling outward not just as entertainment or controversy, but as something more profound. In living rooms and coffee shops, in offices and gymnasiums, people found themselves discussing not celebrity gossip, but essential questions. What is true strength? How do we respond to provocation? What happens when performance gives way to authenticity? On college campuses, philosophy professors incorporated the video into discussions on ego, restraint, and moral courage. In martial arts dojos, instructors played the clip to illustrate their highest principle, that true mastery is found, not in dominating others, but in mastering oneself. The lesson that had begun with a Bible thrown in anger was still unfolding, not as viral spectacle, but as quiet transformation, rippling outward in ways none could have predicted or manufactured. Chuck Norris had come to Dallas as a guest of honor at a charity event. He would leave having demonstrated the greatest strength of all, not the power to defeat others, but the wisdom to elevate them. Not the ability to fight, but the discipline not to. His retaliation against provocation had indeed shocked the world, not through force, but through its absence. Not through domination, but through redirection toward growth. As the congregation settled into the morning's worship, as Jakes began teaching with renewed purpose, as Eli listened with unaccustomed stillness, as Naomi prepared to sing not for applause but for connection, one truth echoed through the chapel and beyond. Real strength isn't found in the spotlight, but in the shadows where character is forged. Not in moments of public victory, but in private decisions to choose wisdom over reaction, restraint over release, transformation over triumph. The Bible that had been thrown in anger had been caught in grace. And in that unexpected exchange, something authentic had been born, something beyond trending hashtags and viral clips, beyond performance and production, something that would endure long after the cameras stopped rolling and the world's attention moved elsewhere. Truth. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.